welcome to Out of the Box Radio with me, your host, Christine Glasdale. Out of the Box Radio is a weekly podcast of audible ear candy dedicated to bringing a fresh perspective on this thing that we call life. And each and every week, we're going to be diving into the topics that matter most with lively conversations on issues such as health, wellness, and transformational healing, all with the goal of creating a better world and becoming a happier human being. I will be your tour guide for this epic adventure, and each and every week we're going to be embarking on a journey with the ultimate goal being transformation to our highest potential. And now, let's get out of the box. My guest today is Elana Freeland, and she is an investigative author, speaker, and researcher who's written several books on geoengineering, chemtrails, and the weaponization of space. Elana first documented geoengineering programs in her 2014 book, Chemtrails, HARP, and the Full Spectrum Dominance of Planet Earth. And in her new book, Under an Ionized Sky, From Chemtrails to Space Fence Lockdown, she exposes geoengineering as a tool of the military-industrial intelligence complex for global control over all of life. I think you'll understand why this is an important conversation you need to hear just by introducing her. Elana, welcome to Out of the Box Radio.
Oh, thanks for having me, Christine.
Now, I just in that introduction, of course, I let our listeners know that there's quite a few things that we're going to talk about, but more importantly, quite a few things that people need to hear and understand and wrap their head around. Let's talk about how did you first get into this subject matter, and what is your background, if you don't mind?
Well, years ago, 3 decades now, I started researching what I used to call the underbelly of the United States government for a series I was writing on my own. I also ghostwrite people's books, but this was my own series, and I called it Subrosa America. And in that series, I turned it into fiction because I needed a broader scene in which I could comment on what's happened to the United States since John F. Kennedy's assassination in Dallas. My political life began with John Kennedy because I was elected at Girls State when I was a teenager to represent 800 girls in Washington at Girls Nation. And when I went to Girls Nation, I was there a week at the American University, and we were hosted, my group was hosted by Vice President Lyndon Johnson. So he was with us every day. And I became I was campaign manager. No, I was Librarian of Congress was what my mock government position was. And I can't help but feel to this day how appropriate that was, given that I'm pretty much an intellectual and a writer and a very deep historian over what's gone on in the past decades of my life in a political sense. So on the next to the last day, we had tea with President Kennedy in the Rose Garden. Bill Clinton was there. He subsequently became president, as you know. He was Boys Nation. I didn't know him. But when he was president, he pulled out a lot of photos that were taken of him in the Rose Garden and during that week at Boys Nation. So somehow he was being groomed a long time ago for the position of power that he would take. I was very affected by John Kennedy, and he was somehow, I know this may sound strange, but somehow he was familiar to me. And he picked me out of the audience and said that I looked like his wife, and made a bit of something over me, and I became sort of a celebrity for 5 minutes in my home state. So when I got back to my home state, I was asked to come and speak on my time with Kennedy, and then 3 months later, he was dead. And I had to go back to these civic groups that had paid for my trip to Washington and speak about my time with Kennedy in rooms filled with sobbing Americans. So that was really the beginning of my larger life, I would say. It's almost like my girlhood turned into something else, not quite adulthood, but certainly conscious and self-conscious of a national scale going on at the same time as my little private life. And so that began my political life. As far as the research I did for the Subrosa America books, I had files on just about everything you can possibly imagine: MK Ultra, CIA, globalization, the UN, etc. But I also had two files, one on chemtrails and one on HAARP, the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Project up in Gakona, Alaska. As soon as Nick Begich's and Gene Manning's book, Angels Don't Play This HAARP, came out in 1995, I was reading it. And that is probably when I went on some sort of list, because I chanced to be reading the book during a break I had as a substitute teacher in the Pacific Northwest at a high school near a very big military base. And I afterwards realized that probably a lot of the staff at the high school, not to mention the students, were from the military base, at least spouses of military officers, etc. So I was reading the book in the faculty room, and two of the male teachers really were very curious about the title. And so I explained the little bit at that point that I knew. And there was another person at the table, a sort of mousy little woman who never looked up from her sandwich. So the next day, I was out raking leaves in my yard, and a military helicopter came over my house and stayed pretty low for about 5 minutes. And I realized that probably someone had reported my reading that book, and it was after that my phone began to have clicks in it. So I realized that I had read about it. I knew that it was a tap of some sort, and so that was the next probably big step in my political life for now. Though I had been in the 60s. In the 60s, I had been involved in various political things going on at universities that I went to. So I was asked when I got back from New Mexico. I lived in England for a few years, and then I came back to the States, moved to New Mexico. I'd already gone to grad school there, and so I settled in there for 5 years. And then I finally came back to the Pacific Northwest and was asked by Adam Parfrey at Farrell House. I had done some editing for him while in England, and he asked if I thought I could write a book on chemtrails. So I said, of course, yeah. And so that was the beginning. I had already encountered one of the large personalities in the chemtrails movement at that time, and still to a great extent, Clifford Carnicom.
Oh, I know Clifford, yes.
Yeah, who's an independent scientist. He had worked for the DOD and the BLM in years past, and had left them to become to remain independent. And so Clifford, I met him through a friend, and we all started going out to breakfast together in New Mexico, in Santa Fe, at Harry's Roadhouse. And we would sit and fall into discussion over the research that he was acquiring at that time. That would have been the early 2000s. And what he was doing was he was collecting detritus off of his HEPA filter on his trailer, and precipitation, having it analyzing it himself. And he was coming up with what we now know to be Morgellons as being part of whatever was falling from the chemical trails being left across the what once beautiful blue northern New Mexico sky. So Clifford had already gotten me very intrigued, and he had begun the process by which I realized I had two files, the chemtrails HARP and the HARP file, and that they really belonged together because they were a unit. And I had not realized that until Clifford set me on that trail. So I started in 2012. We had a fantastic conference down in Los Angeles, the Consciousness Beyond Chemtrails Conference, sponsored by John White. And it was there that I saw the relatively large personalities that were dominating the so-called chemtrails movement at that time, which was largely an internet movement and remains so to this day. And I was the new kid on the block. Nobody knew me. I sort of just sat back and watched, and Clifford and I spent quite a bit of time together. And then when I got back to the Northwest, I started writing, and the writing went very rapidly, but it took 2 years of research and writing to write Chemtrails HARP and the Full Spectrum Dominance of Planet Earth. So that book came out in 2014, and immediately I started writing the next book because when I had been on Coast to Coast, I had after being on Coast to Coast, I was contacted by literally hundreds of people, and one of them was Billy Hayes, who is known as the HARP man in the movement. And Billy had a phenomenal life. He's still alive. He's in Kansas, and he had been the tower man, the erector. They call them tower erectors. He had been the team leader at the HARP installation, and in fact, he'd worked on these microwave and radio frequency, radio wave towers and installations his entire life. I think his first job was at 8 years old. His father had worked for an agency, a 3-letter agency I won't name, and Billy had followed in his steps. And so Billy contacted me and said, okay, people told me about your book. They said, Billy, you won't believe it. She's talking about the same thing you've been saying for 15 years. And he said, but I have more. He said, there's more to this than just the chemical trails and radio frequency that are producing the weather engineering going on. And we weren't using the term geoengineering so much then in 2014. No, right. But we were familiar with it. We had heard David Keith and Ken Caldera, the geoengineers that are generally trotted out at the conferences that talk about the sort of wringing their hands and, oh gosh, we're probably going to have to use it because yes. The global warming is bad.
Exactly.
We're going to have to pull out this really oh my, and really when it had been going on for 2 decades already.
So let's first, because we're talking about geoengineering, but let's take it a step back for those who are not familiar with this at all. If anybody's looked up to the sky, they might notice there are these long streaks that go across, not just like a regular contrail from a jet or a passenger jet, like going from, LA to Hawaii. It is because when those planes go by, there's a condensation trail, and it's a short amount, and then it usually dissipates, right? Because it's water. Now, what we've been noticing, what millions and millions of people around the world have been documenting and investigating, as yourself, are what has been commonly called as chemtrails, not contrails, but chemtrails. Now, let's just go to the real basics that we can do. What's the difference between a chemtrail and a contrail?
I feel like I'm going back in history now, because
Take the time machine back.
most of what I do is way in advance of this.
I know.
But
just
but
for those
yeah,
that are
let's start there. Okay, the what I call chemical trails or chemtrails, and chemtrails is a term that we have borrowed from the U.S. Air Force Academy. It is not a conspiracy theory word. It started with the military, and it was very cunning of them to turn it into some sort of tinfoil hat kind of derogatory term.
Right.
But it is straight from the military. That's what they had on their chemistry manuals for pilots that were preparing to go up in the skies in the Air Force. So the contrail is a condensation trail, and that means water vapor. You're talking ice crystals, water vapor, boom, that's it. And for that to happen, the altitude has to be specific, 29,000 and above. And to my knowledge, to this day, because of the fuel that is now used in commercial and military jets, what is known as JP8. And there are some biofuels coming up now that are also used. But to my knowledge, there is no condensation trail beyond maybe a little Piper jet that flies up from a local airport. I can't even imagine a real contrail anymore. I mean, I haven't seen one in years.
Yeah, me either.
And I haven't seen much documentation from other countries, and I get a lot of material. People send me just thousands of things. I haven't seen one for a long time, but if I were to see one and compare it to what we're accustomed to seeing now, which is these long white trails coming out, usually there's 3 of them coming out the back of the jet, and sometimes you'll see 2 additional ones on the wings. These are anything but water vapor, and they are loaded with chemicals, at least from the combustion chamber of the engine, where the chemicals in the fuel undergo a process called pyrolysis, and that's a very hot in the combustion chamber, where those chemicals are oxidized and really turned into a very different kind of compound than what originally went in. In fact, this fuel that is now used commercially and in military jets is classified, and it is very hard to get any formulae for these fuels because it is considered national security. So this is a major problem, that we are all breathing that. If it were condensation trails, contrails, I wouldn't be having this discussion with you, because we did that for ever since the Wright brothers in the early part of the 20th century. So, but this is different. And these not only are we breathing what's coming out of the engine, the combustion chamber, but we are also breathing that same fuel when it's spewed off of the wings before landing. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's normal for flights, especially commercial jets carrying a lot of people, to offload fuel before landing. So that is just spewed out, and tough toenails for whoever's below it, and we're breathing that as well. So I don't even have to add a supplementary system to the jet to reveal that this is an environmental issue beyond belief, and it's absolutely being ignored and avoided in any discussion of climate change, geoengineering, global warming, any of the terms that are being trotted out. This is one part of it that absolutely the FAA and the EPA and all the types of environmental groups should be all over, because we're breathing it, it's falling down onto the earth, it's going into the soil, it's in the trees, it's in the bark, it's
everywhere. No, it's everywhere, and it's global. It is global, and when you look at the way that once these trails are laid down, how they fatten, how they basically spread to this milky white, and it changes the the atmosphere in general. It changes. If it was a beautiful, clear, sunny day, after a couple hours of this, you have this just haze hanging over you. Now, you had mentioned earlier that you had worked with Clifford Carnicom, who's been doing this for so long and doing much research, collecting samples of air samples and also water samples. Could you share with us, share with the audience, what some of those samples that were tested, what he found in the water and the air from these chemtrails or geoengineering, whatever we want to call them. But can you talk about what was discovered?
Oh, yeah. But let me preface that with the fact that for Clifford and I and many researchers and observers who are following what's going on in the skies, it's not just the pollution aspect. It's not just the chemicals that we're breathing in down here on the Earth after they come out of jet engines or off the wings or wherever. It's that it's intentional. It's not just, oh, we don't care, we're going to just have our jets fly anyway because we want to make a buck. No, this has many levels of intentionality for a variety of military operations that are going on right now. And weather engineering is only one of them. So I just want that to linger in the minds, because I'm going to get more deep into that. But let me just talk a little bit about what Clifford found. And of course, he was collecting precipitation and finding aluminum, barium, strontium, titanium, lithium, etc. I mean, the latter two are relatively recent compared to when he was collecting at the end of the 90s and the early 2000s. But he was also finding these fibers. And the fibers were made of polymers, like mylar. And the fibers were in his HEPA filter and in the precipitation. He also found the very infamous spider webbing material that some people have found, and when they touch it, they may get sick because it's so lethal. He found he didn't have the equipment to be able to see on a nano scale at that time, and if he had, he would have discovered also sensors. They're called MEMS, GEMS, and NEMS. They're very tiny, and they are two-way transceivers. They transmit, they receive, they collect data, and there are now by 2018. Trillions of these nano-sized sensors have been released in the upper atmosphere, supposedly to collect data for space. I think it's called Space Situational Awareness (SSA). But really, they all filter down, and so we're breathing those in too. And they are not engineered genetically or otherwise engineered to be eliminated from the body. So we have those in us as well. We've breathed those in. We have microprocessors are also released. Microprocessors are tiny little computers, tiny little machines, nanoparticle machines, and they too are transceivers. So there's a lot coming down. Now, Clifford was not able to see those two latter, but he now knows that they're there if you only have the very expensive equipment in order to see them. I think they're called electro-optical microscopes. So what he discovered, though, with the aluminum, I mean, that's serious enough.
Of course,
The aluminum that has been released is just a killer. It's a killer for us. We now are making ties between it and Alzheimer's, and at one end of the aging spectrum, and autism at the other end of the aging spectrum. So the aluminum is not our friend. It is natural in the environment, but not nearly to this degree. Biologists in California, I'm thinking of Francis Mangels right now, have done a lot of collection, a lot of analysis of soil that's turning extremely alkaline, and that's not good for growing. And the analysis shows that the aluminum is 225,000 times what it should be. It's so far over the norm that it's impossible to even fathom how anything can grow. Of course, we're now seeing trees basically dying from the root up in the bark, and that is greatly because of the aluminum. I mean, when I'm talking aluminum coming down, it's in the fuels. It may be, there may be more added to what's coming down for various operations that the military is running.
It's also a conductor. Wouldn't it be a conductor? Because it's a metal.
Yes, and that's really the key.
Yeah.
It was originally called chaff by the military, and it was which meant that it was in order for radar to pick up any sorts of objects in a field, it requires particulate matter to be in that field. Otherwise, the radio frequency or microwaves really cannot detect anything. So the aluminum is primarily about wireless operations, and I make that very clear in the book. I spend a lot of time on that aspect in the book about to come out. So Clifford, yes, he was the, to my knowledge, and he was the Lone Ranger.
Oh yes,
collecting all this
many years
at the end of the 90s and the early 2000s. And so among those, I've named the conductive metals on a nanoscale. I've named the sensors, the microprocessors. Also, I named the polymers like the mylar. And one of the fibers that had the mylar exterior, that's what Clifford began to analyze, and that's when he discovered the morgellons. And he renamed it the cross-domain bacteria, primarily because by the time he had analyzed it, which took years and years on a shoestring budget, he had realized that it really crossed over all three domains of life on this planet. And that it had been genetically engineered. So the Morgellons fiber, the fiber is the exterior, but inside are four other parts that he meticulously separated out. He then began to look at people's blood and urine and saliva, and I of course gave him mine, and I was able to see through his microscope back in probably 2009, I could see the cross-domain bacteria munching and sucking out the iron from my red blood cells under his microscope.
Oh my God.
So I know we all have it. We have all breathed it in. Now, some people, as you know, develop terrible skin lesions, which leads some physicians and clinicians to think, oh, it's a skin ailment. No, it's not. It is actually a blood condition, but it will reveal itself from time to time in the skin when the body, the immune system, is desperately trying to throw it off. But to my knowledge, and I certainly haven't checked with everybody on the planet Earth, because the atmosphere is one large bubble chamber, To my knowledge, we have all breathed it in. And that is only one of the pathogens. Other pathogens may also have been released. I think right away of what people call Lyme's. I think of other challenging diseases that are what we call autoimmune diseases. All of these are really less disease and more symptom of a condition of our immune system, that these are all assaulting our immune system. People would love it if I'd say, hey, here it is. This is how we're going to stop this tomorrow. Write your congressman, sign this petition, blah, blah, blah. But of course, I don't waste my time on those things. I try to prepare people for the change in American lifestyle here in America, from the people who feel that they are living a relatively middle-class lifestyle.
Land of the free, home of the brave, right?
Yeah. Yes, all of that. I try to prepare them for the fact that is going to change, that the external life is going to change. And already we can see, if we care to look, the internal is changing as well, and that includes our immune system. I think the American health today is probably worse than it's ever been. And of course, it's not discussed because the big pharma industry and the medical industry are making masses of billions, trillions of dollars off of people's illness. And they're collecting data that I'm sure some of which is being shared with the CDC, the EPA, etc., who are very much on this distribution. I'll call it a dissemination, distribution, inoculation of these pathogens that are being genetically engineered under chemical and biological warfare. Period.
And you just mentioned something that just struck a chord with me. When I was a child, we did have our vaccinations. I remember having to line. I remember being pulled out of class and at a very young age, taken to the nurse's office and hearing children crying and screaming, and I didn't understand what was going on. There was nobody told us what was happening, and we all had that big, I guess it was the polio vaccine, the big one, the huge gun. But even when I was a child, we had a few vaccines that were given to us. Now, children today, if you have a baby and you're born, if you have a baby and this baby is born in the United States and in several other countries around the world, they are also immediately given massive amounts of vaccines. You're not really told what's in them. If you were given a list of what's in them, you don't really necessarily know. But then you had just mentioned that. So I'm thinking we're already having these babies come in with a weakened immune system. And then being exposed to whatever is being sprayed in the air, all of these different particulates. You mentioned, of course, the aluminum, the nanotechnology, which just is on its own an absolutely frightening thought. That we have these little strange little computer creatures in our bodies. I know there's also barium, which I believe is something, maybe it's to keep it, I don't know if it's to keep it inside of us or what the purpose is of that. But so we're coming into this world already with a weakened immune system, and then boom, being hit with this. Now there's another layer, and this is the layer that I think people they're definitely not aware of. They're not aware of all of this, Elana. And then on top of it, we're talking about a lot of the phones, our cell phones, which we carry with us, which are prolific. The cell phone towers are all over the place. But then you have this move because the government wants so badly to make sure that people get the best cell phone coverage ever, right? So they want to move to 5G. Now, this is not on anybody's radar. The news isn't talking about it, of course, but I have heard and read that a move from 3G, 4G, and then now going to 5G, that 5G is like, there's the prison right there. There's the fence.
The space fence lockdown.
Yeah,
Yes, you're absolutely right.
Talk about 5G, about this move from 5G. We're talking about radiation, electronic radiation, or what? What is your understanding?
The big part is that this is very deceptive. The public is told that it's just one more generation up from fourth generation. That's not true. This is completely different from the second, third, fourth generation. Those were all a type of wave that you could imagine might not be as unhealthy. But the truth is that the 5G is millimeter wave technology. Now, so far, the only place we, the public, have seen millimeter waves used are in the machines that TSA uses to look through people's clothing for weapons, etc. That's millimeter wave tech. It'll go through walls, it'll go through anything. And it is very high frequency. It is very invasive. And I will go, I'm now writing the third book in the series on synthetic biology, and I will go deeply into how this is going to impact our DNA, because our DNA is basically a little antenna. That's really all it is. Very subtle, very brilliant and vulnerable. And this is a nightmare. This is a nightmare because they're going to put 5G units and they're going to be smaller. And you might not even be able to see them once they realize that the public is waking up to these things. But they're going to put them throughout, they're going to blanket neighborhoods with them because the 5G is going to be the pickup point for the Internet of Things, the IoT. And the Internet of Things is simply that your garage opener and your car and your computer and your refrigerator and your laundry unit and your stove, etc., they all talk to each other. They are all on a similar frequency so that they can communicate. These are the Big Brother instruments in the home that will keep track of when people are home.
The smart TVs, right?
What's going on? What conversations are going on? This is the real meat of the surveillance state. That is really what the space fence is all about. So the 5G will be in the neighborhood, and that all of the machines will be talking to the 5G, and the 5G will then transfer that to various points where they're picking up that data and translating it with either supercomputers or artificial intelligence. This idea of turning the Earth and society into a surveillance instrument so that they know where everyone is and where everything is phenomenal. And it's come up so fast in the last, I'll give it 5 decades, that, Americans have been absolutely, I'm sure, are in a brain fog these days, because every day, I'm getting data from all over the world from people about new technology coming out, and all of it has that smacks of that 1984 transhumanist cyborg control that Dr. Rosalie Bertell, the great epidemiologist, wrote in her book about planet Earth and turning it into a weapon. And she was absolutely right. That is exactly what's happening.
Well, when you said George Orwell's 1984, I thought about that immediately, and having every single thing be observed and documented. But that is also, isn't that what when they introduced the smart meters, again, as a way of it's always about being more efficient. It's going to make your life so much easier. Whenever they sell you a bill of goods, I always figure this: whenever the government or a corporation is telling you that they're going to make things easier on you or make your life better, run, right?
Yes.
But the smart meters now, these things, people willingly take them on they're on their homes, they're next to their bedrooms or their children's bed. These are what are supposed to be reading what your electrical usage is, right? The electricity that you use in your home. But these from the get-go have had so many issues. People who have complained of extreme headaches, being absolutely sick. These have some of them have caught on fire. It's because of the large amount of radiation that is being emitted from them to get that data back to whatever the station is?
Yeah, it's less the radiation and more the pulsing. I mean,
right.
This pulsing is very, very important. As Billy Hayes drilled into me, you can stack many frequencies on a pulse, and so I'll give you an example. All right, so like when you come home and your garage door, you have the little thing that you push and the button and garage door open. That's because you're activating its frequency. It recognizes its frequency. It opens. Push it again. It recognizes its frequency. It closes. So that in that simple way, we see that everything is a matter of frequency. If you know its frequency, and you have electromagnetic weapons, which the military, of course, is very interested in, then you can take power over that thing because you have its frequency. Another way of saying it is you have its electronic signature.
Correct.
And everything has its own signature. Now you go to the human being, and if your cell phone, and by the way, I do not own one. I do not want one. I will never own one. It's like carrying your own weapon system around for the military. If you take that cell phone and you're not even putting it up to your brain, you're just carrying it in your car, in your purse, in your back pocket, whatever. It's pulsing. You've got it turned off, but it's still on, and it's always pulsing. And so that pulsing can be used. Now, we already know that all of them have a microphone that never turns off. It's a listening device. And so is the television now. And so is the Internet of Things, the refrigerator. They're all listening. And they're all their data is being picked up and brought to centers like fusion centers. We have fusion centers all over the United States. Nobody ever talks about them. These are exchanging sort of roundhouses for collecting data and processing it, so that Big Brother knows everything about everyone everywhere all the time. So that cell phone can be used if they know the frequency of your anger quotient or your passion, your sexual passion, your whatever. And if you individually become a problem, then that cell phone turns against you and can be used and exploited, as can the whole Internet of Things, as can the entire house of 60 hertz, all the wiring in the house. In other words, this profound moment when this fascinating technology is being taken to its extreme, because the military is running programs that are so inimical to life, and it won't give them up, that it absolutely cannot have the public know that it's doing that, what's going on. And that's our challenge. I've been an activist. I'm a 60s radical. I've been an activist for over 50 years. And I have done everything in my power, giving public talks, workshops, writing, you name it, to wake America up, because I knew this was coming. I knew it. It didn't take a rocket science PhD to figure that out. All you had to do was have a political conscience and not feel that, the authorities will take care of it. because we in the 60s, we knew what authorities did.
Yeah, right.
Well, they assassinated our president.
Yes.
They assassinated Martin Luther King. They assassinated Robert Kennedy. They assassinated Malcolm X. I mean, we know what authorities do. So now people are walking around with these cell phones, not realizing that they can be pulsed, and you can pulse neighborhoods. You can pulse whole cities. They're all getting the same pulse through their cell phone. You're creating a field that even the one like me who's doesn't even have one of them, but I'm walking through the field.
You're still being impacted, right? I have a friend who cannot.
Yes.
She cannot be like, she'll go to conferences, these big seminars, and she has such a hard time because everybody that's sitting there, if it's 500 people, they all have their cell phone on. And even if they turn down the volume or whatever, they're still. She said it's unbearable for her. She's very sensitive to that, so she could feel it, and that's just. I mean, that's just.
Yeah, that's electrosensitivity.
Yes.
And in Europe, at least in the northern European nations, they now respect that is an actual condition, and so they are helping people who have sensitivity. Whereas in this country, you're just considered a nut job. Certainly, in every conference should immediately tell people to put their phones on airplane mode. Just put it on airplane mode. Now, I was at recently. I was at a friend's house, and we had several of us were gathered, and a woman was sharing with us the various electromagnetic readers that she has purchased for various to read the radio frequency, to read microwaves, to read directionality, and all these. And it was fascinating, and we tested the airplane mode, and the airplane mode really had a much lower pulsing rate. It was almost silent. So it really convinced me that the airplane mode will definitely help. And everybody should be keeping their phone on airplane mode all the time. That's brilliant.
That is brilliant. Let's repeat that again, because I want our listeners to know that, because when you are on a plane, they don't want your cell phone to interfere with their electronics, right? So that's why they tell you to put it on airplane mode. So let's put that out again. Go ahead, say that one more time if you don't mind.
Well, we tested the airplane mode on a cell phone, and it definitely works for less pulsing, and people should keep their phone on airplane mode all the time. But people are becoming so addicted to the somebody wants me. Gee, I wonder if so and so is going to call. All that stuff.
Facebook, and Instagram. Yeah.
Well, any of it. Just the cell phone itself. I mean, the obsession with the cell phone makes me wonder if one of the pulsing that is coming across is about the frequency for, what would you call it? Addiction? Would you call it neediness? I don't know what the word would be, but so many people are so hooked in to their cell phones, and not just young people. We often laugh about young people just always looking down, but no, I'm surrounded by people. See, and I do fine without a cell phone. I mean, okay, there will be the occasional emergency, but there probably have been over the last 80,000 years for an emergency now and then anyway.
Right.
And then I just don't want to be considered so important that I need to be tracked 24/7 by my government or others that are concerned about the books I write or whatever. I just come home to my my wired phone and see if there's a blipping that shows somebody called. Hardly ever anybody calls, which is great. And life goes on. I don't really need those devices. And now people who are involved in organizations really studying the cancer rate that has gone off the charts for people that put these little transmitters, and that's what they are, put the transmitter up to their brain. They're saying, it would be much better if everybody went back to wired. And I
you
totally agree.
and you've studied it, and you understand most of the population are not, they're sold on the convenience, quote unquote convenience.
Well, it's a religion.
It is a religion.
It's a religion for the American.
Especially for, well, not just for Americans. All across the globe, there's more and more studies of young people, preteens, on their phones, on their cell phones, on their devices, literally 14 hours a day, 14 to 15 hours a day.
But let me tell you about Europe. Maybe you don't know this. Germany, the Scandinavian countries, they are banning wireless from all schools, all libraries, all public buildings, because they know it will mean cancer. They know it. And they are not run by corporations the way we are. And we have traded our American soul of independence and individuality
for a buck,
for convenience.
Well, yeah.
Come on.
But the politicians,
right? The politicians like that. I think it was Winston Churchill or somebody who said, if people are willing to trade their freedoms for convenience or any of that, well, then maybe they didn't deserve them in the first place. And I feel that.
Well, and I think that we're a population who is, Disney-fied. Look at these pretty baubles over here. Look at the Kardashians. What are they doing? Yes. Look at this celebrity. Like right now, it's, with the award seasons, people are bedazzled by, Hollywood actors and actresses, celebrities wearing expensive, clothing, and so. We are, and we have been a nation who's been bedazzled by celebrity and perhaps wealth.
It's called mind control.
It is.
We have been completely mind controlled, and it's through the television. I have never owned a television. The closest I've gotten is this little laptop I'm talking on now. I cannot tell you how dangerous these convenience items are, and having turned over all of our thinking and all of the reading that people used to do to the visual center of the right brain, this is a bad idea. This is a very bad idea. And I'm now I'm not mincing words anymore, because this is imminent. Let's just bring in the other part that we were talking about earlier. You have a wireless atmosphere. We have it's been ionized. It's through HAARP that originally happened. We now are bringing ionized, which basically just means electrons, electrical. Our whole atmosphere is electrical now, and it is kept electrical for wireless operations. They only gave us the cell phone when they needed those cell towers for military operations. Otherwise, they kept them from themselves. I mean, it's the military that had the computer first, too. They had the phones first. They had the television first. They will only give us these little baubles and bangles when they need to use us for military operations. And that's exactly what's happened. And when Clinton signed off on the 1996 Telecommunications Act, that is the act that says no community has the right to interfere with wherever a telecommunications corporation decides they need a tower for communications. So we have no rights before the government, who hires these telecom companies. And by the way, let's not fool ourselves. They are military contractors. And these are all military operations. They are all military infrastructure. And that's what I go into in the Space Fence book, is to show how this giant machine on the Earth and in low Earth orbit over the Earth, how this works for their operations. And human beings and the health of forests and animals be damned.
Exactly. Which is, it is, the word doesn't even come to mind how evil that is. It's absolute control, absolute dominance. It's not playing God, because my vision of God is the complete opposite of what this is. But it is quite dark, and it is quite evil. to have
Well,
that.
that's what full spectrum dominance means. That's the second part of the title of my first book. I'm talking they want full spectrum dominance. It is a military doctrine of full spectrum dominance.
Another doctrine or another military document too is, and people can look that up, is owning the weather. And we only have a couple minutes left in this broadcast, and I could talk to you for hours and hours and hours. Oh my gosh! I want to have. First of all, will you come back and we can dive into some particular topics and go in deep and have you back on many times on the show?
Yeah.
My guest this hour has been Elana Freeland, investigative author, speaker, and researcher who has written several books on geoengineering, chemtrails, and the weaponization of space. Her latest book is Under an Ionized Sky, From Chemtrails to Space Fence Lockdown. And where can people get the book?
They can get it at Amazon, or they can order it direct from Feral House, who is my publisher.
Is there a way for people to get in touch with you? Do you have a website or something where people can communicate?
I do. It's elanafreeland.com. And then you'll find there's an email there, and if you need to, you can contact me that way.
I'm going to give out the spelling so people know how it's spelled.
ELANAFREELAND.com, all lowercase.
Definitely check out her website, but most importantly, get the book as well, Under an Ionized Sky, from Elana Freeland. And again, the website is ELANAFREELAND.com. And Elana, I want to thank you so much for your courage, for your tenacity, for your wonderful gift to this world that you've been doing over these last few decades, and we'll continue to get your word out as well when you come back on Out of the Box Radio. I want to thank you for coming on.
All right. Thank you so much, Christine.
You're welcome. And I want to thank you, listeners, for listening today. Remember, if you enjoyed the show and you want to share it with others, please do. You can share this link through either YouTube. You can share it easily in email or post it on your social media, or you can share the actual audio version of the show from the podcast, which is outoftheboxwithchristine.podbean.com. And please do share this information with as many people as you can. Until next time, I want to thank you, and we'll talk to you very, very soon. And as I always say, remember to think outside of the box. Bye for now.